Welcome to Habeas Treasures, where I try to decipher this book, There's Treasure Inside by Jon Collins-Black, in order to find one of the 5 hidden treasures. On today's episode, I'll continue my breakdown of the Pokemon Box chapter, and specifically why I think Saint Ignatius might hold the key to finding the treasure. Let's begin. In my last video, I explained why I think the Mudkip and Swampert that are mentioned in the story are references to when the Jesuits operated a seminary at the West Baden Springs Hotel. Now let's review some other parts of the Pokemon Box story that might also tie in to the same theme. First, let's start with the passage in the story where the author arrives with the Froakie at the hiking spot. He writes, "When we arrived at our hiking spot, the weather was sweltering. Maybe high summer wasn't the best time to hide the treasure after all, I thought to myself." All right, let's stop here. According to the internet, high summer in the northern hemisphere occurs from mid-July to mid-August. Coincidentally, the feast of Saint Ignatius, the founder of the Jesuits, occurs on July 31st, exactly right in the middle of the high summer window. The next lines in the story further describe the heat. The air felt hotter than a Charizard's breath, but the Froakie didn't seem to mind. He told me not to worry, as it would be unlikely that we would encounter any fire Pokemon along our way. In this part of the story, the author makes multiple references to the word fire. First, with the statement about the Charizard who breathes fire, and second, with the comment about not seeing any fire Pokemon. I think this is another reference to Saint Ignatius, whose name Ignatius in Latin means fiery one. So it's possible that this entire paragraph in the story is one big clue pointing to Saint Ignatius and the Jesuits at West Baden. All right. What other lines in the story might be clues pointing to St. Ignatius and the Jesuits? How about the very first paragraph in the chapter? I've always suspected there might be clues at the beginning of the story that point to where the treasure is hidden, especially if the story is set up like a mirror where the beginning reflects the ending. I think it's likely that the paragraph that begins the story contains these clues. So let's read that paragraph. "I was 5.5 years old when my parents crammed our hard-cased Samsonite luggage into the hatchback of the family station wagon. My dad and his father wheeled over and hitched up the Jayco pop-up camper. The 2 words that jump out to me as possible clues are Samsonite and Jayco. Why include these brands in the story? Here's a possible reason. When Saint Ignatius founded the Jesuits, the original name of the religious order in Spanish was Compañía de Jesús, which translates to the Company of Jesus. I think this might be what the author is referring to as Jayco or J Company. Now, what about Samsonite? Well, the word Samsonite can be anagrammed to read Mason site. And if you put these 2 ideas together, you get the Mason site of the J Company or Jesuits. If the treasure is hidden near the West Baden Springs Hotel, then a likely place based on this possible clue might be near this masonry stone wall that surrounds the statue of St. Ignatius. You can see the approximate location of the statue and wall here in relation to the hotel. The statue of St. Ignatius stands today where the Our Lady of Lourdes Catholic Church used to sit back in the early 1900s. The church was demolished because the ground under the structure was unstable, but the block wall and parts of the foundation still remain. One additional possible connection to St. Ignatius comes from the image of the Greninja in the chapter. The Greninja appears to have some strange markings on his right leg. These markings look like exposed bone, almost as if the Greninja was injured. Well, coincidentally, St. Ignatius injured his right leg at the Battle of Pamplona when it was shattered by a cannonball. This was the event that led to his spiritual awakening and the founding of the Jesuits. I also find it interesting that this event happened in the year 1521, which just so happens to be a year that contains the same numbers as the author's opening line in the story, I was 5.5. All right, that's all I've got for today's video. In my next video, I'll dive into why I think the underground river that feeds the sulfur springs and a best-selling novel that takes place at the hotel could help explain the end of the chapter.